As I see it, Dan Melnick, who was working with Susskind at Talent Associates, said to Mel Brooks and to me at different times, he said, what are the two big films in the world today? James Bond and Clouseau. Get the picture. And that basically was it. I had no experience in sitcom, and to be truthful, which I am now and then, I didn't really like sitcom. So it never occurred to me to try to look for sitcom writers. I was more interested in having friends around that I knew and could trust. But we were doing satire, and satire doesn't ordinarily come out of sitcom. I mean, the sitcom of the American television sitcom 50s, 60s, not a lot of satire. The kind of writing I was looking for came out of variety shows. You know, who could do, guys who could do sort of bursts of interesting takes on current events, historical subjects, weird things. And also, since we had conceived of the show as a little movie rather than a little play, which sitcoms always were, and most of them still are, the only connecting thing being, unfortunately, the laugh track. And I'd never written a little TV play. So it always seemed to me that it would make more sense if they were little movies. They were little Bond-like movies with a beginning, middle, and end, an actual plot, such as it was, and ancillary characters that could come in from everywhere, from all over the place to augment our main people. It was really more Bondian. I mean, you could argue that you could say that Smart was more Clouseauian, but the setting was more Bondian, and so I thank both of the inventors of both those people, as I have so often in the past. I gave assignments to the writers, rewrote whatever needed rewriting, wrote some of the scripts, and tossed around ideas about what to do next, what to do to make it more interesting. But basically, most of it was conferencing with the writers. And we started with 6 guys, with 3 teams. Wonderful writers, all of them. And added 1 or 2 or 3 outsiders along the way, probably more, because I've forgotten. But that's what a script editor does. I used to write almost all of the what do they call them? Teases and tags. The first 3 pages and the last 3 pages, although that's not, as I say it, I'm not sure it's entirely true. I used to think I wrote most of the teases and the tags. And I usually injected whatever political satire there was into these lunatic little stories. Well, it was up all our alleys. I mean, it was sort of signature stuff for me and for Mel and for a number of the other writers. There was, for instance, Stan Burns and Mike Marmer. I'd worked with Stan Burns on the Steve Allen show, and we were good friends, and he was funnier than any other human being. And he and Marmer, they were a compatible team in the same way as you have just described the sense of the show, which was, let's do, although I'm not sure we ever articulated it, but we all had it in our minds, let's do the slapstick for the kids and the political satire for the adults, and see if we can, you know, squeeze them together and make it work. So teams like Burns and Marmer were perfect for that, because Stan wrote the greatest jokes in the history of the world, and Mike was very good at continuity. Gardner and Caruso used to write the most cartoony of the most satirical of show business shows, the parodies of a situation in which there were vampires and werewolves, or the parody of a circus background, or something like that. And in those shows, there was always the danger of going way over the top, particularly with, you know, the outsized characters that would populate such a bizarre little adventure. But everybody always tried to keep it sort of real. You could go as far out as, much further out than most other shows, but you had to come back to some sort of vague reality. But in certain situations, we were parodying specific events from other movies and, you know, from sort of cultural touchstone things that everyone knew, so everyone could appreciate the parody of it. Or playing around with the bureaucracy, the political bureaucracy, and the, you know, stuff from Washington, the Washington jokes, and you could go pretty far. The Big Arrow always comes to mind. The Indian tribe story, which I didn't think would ever work, but I so liked the gag. No, there were great jokes in it, which ended up with what they thought, what Smart and 99 discovered was it wasn't a weapon of mass destruction that was taking off from inside the huge teepee, but it was a gigantic arrow aimed at the heart of Washington. Now that kind of stuff, you know, is so far over the line as you think, well, there's no way to approach it as a real thing. But at that point, if the characters are in place, and they'd been in place for some months, you don't really have to worry about it. If the audience buys who they are, then they'll buy that stuff that's that far out. I can't recall any specific item, but I know that Leonard, Don, me, the guys, everybody, when they'd see something really loony in the paper, they'd cut it out and bring it in and say, you know, can we build a story around this, or at least build a joke around it? Yeah, the strike did come out of something real, as did the Indian situation. I can't remember what it was. I think it was the feds busting some reservation for some lame reason. But all of those usually came out of some little piece in the Times, in one Times or another. Whom had we been thinking of? Well, there was a list, you know, like Orson Bean and Tony Randall and Tom Poston. There were quite a few names, all of which would have pleased me. I mean, they were all, you know, talented, interesting guys and funny. Once Don's voice is in the air, you can't kill it with, you know, several sticks. It's so decisive and idiosyncratic, you know, which of course, as most of you probably know, originally derived from Don's parody of William Powell summing up a murder or a case at the end of any of the Thin Man's show. Well, you see, if the little man, all that stuff. And it was part of his act. And in the pilot, which is rarely shown because it's in black and white, he really does his full-out Bill Powell voice. And then over the next 3 or 4 shows, it got worn away. It got softened a bit because it was a touch abrasive. Because I didn't want to give her a name. I just wanted her to have a number. I thought that would be good in television, to have a beautiful woman who never had a name. Mel named Smart 86 for the once obvious, now not quite as obvious reason that 86 was barcode for shut him off, if that's meaningful to anyone watching this. And I can't remember how it happened, but when we were talking about Barbara, I said, no, she's 99 forever. Just don't give her any, let's not ever give her any characteristics that make her seem like, that make her move toward any cliche of womanhood. You know, in the pilot, she takes her cap, she's this tall, beautiful girl, she takes her cap off and her hair comes down an inch, and he says, oh, you're a woman. It's almost like all those decisions are aspects of Smart's dopiness and not any discrete principles of their own. I know when they got married, I had heard when they got married, she had to either reveal her name or talk about herself as Mrs. Smart or something like that, but that would have made me unhappy. Yeah, I didn't want anybody ever to be related to anybody, and I would have fought tooth and nail to keep them from getting married and having kids had I still been with the show. That was not my idea of what it was about. But yeah, basically it was about those other hours, not, you know, who knew that, I think the chief was married to someone, but the nearest we got to his personal life was when I made Don extract the chief's real name in court, which was a moment I really cherished, when he finally admitted that his real name was Thaddeus, to his incredible embarrassment. And that's about as personal as it ever got. You know, they couldn't really kiss, Don and Barbara. And if they ever were on the verge of saying, I love you, it was transmogrified into something very silly. Oh, I don't think one does go about writing a catchphrase. They have their own life force. Of course, the famous one came out of Don's act, Would You Believe? That came out of his Bill Powell thing. Sorry about that, Chief. I have no idea where that came from. And it seemed to me, well, it's a little generic to be a line that's going to be repeated anywhere in the world. And then I was doing some research on a script I was writing about the Vietnam War, and there were some live pickups in this audio tape I had on the streets in Saigon, and there I heard it over and over again. Sorry about that, Chief, from GIs. And I thought, oh boy, that's really weird. But I don't know how it started. I don't know whether it started out of script or whether it was done or what. And other things like missed it by that much. I have no idea whether. I remember putting it into a script, but I don't know whether I put it in because Don gave it to me or because I don't think I invented it. So I don't know where it came from. And various versions of a kind of runner gag, which was, that's the most something I've ever seen. You know, this is the third time this month that absurd thing has happened to me. I probably theoretically would have argued against them as being repetitive, childish, and cheap. On the other hand, you can't beat them. Bernie Capel, who came in, actually most of Bernie's stuff was done after I left. I think we just started with Bernie toward the end of the second season. And he was an old friend from somewhere, and I can't remember where. Was he on Steve Allen? I just don't remember. But there was something nice about the archaic nature of having a Nazi in this mix. That Chaos was a dopey enough institution to hire a noisy, blatant ex-Nazi, present Nazi, to do some of its nefarious deeds. And Bernie was always funny, always terrific. Bernie Capel playing Siegfried, the highest up Nazi in Chaos. his catchphrase was, "We don't shush here," but it could have been, "We don't do anything in particular," you know. And I don't know who wrote it. I don't know where it came from, whether it came from a writer or an act or something. If Mel had been there, I would have certainly thought that he would have done it, because it's almost out of the producers. We invented an awful lot of peculiar gadgets, which gave rise, I guess, to Inspector Gadget. It was, yeah, and of course they're really fun to invent, and they're fun to do when they work. Sometimes they're more clumsy than funny, but still, stuff like, you know, his fake arms that he got out of because they weren't real arms when they were tied to something always amused me. A lot of it too is, I had a certain background in silent film comedy. I don't mean I never was in silent films, but I had a love of them and a fairly wide knowledge of them. And a lot of that stuff comes out of the Keaton Chaplin tradition. $1 Million Legs, a favorite film of mine, a W.C. Fields film, along with about 9 other of the most famous comedians in early film history, is filled with very get-smartian stuff. It has a political an element of political satire, an element of parody to it, and a lot of also the Olympics is a background. It's very physical comedy, and that kind of stuff was very influential in what we did, I think. The Cone of Silence only was used in the first 6 shows, I think, maybe 3 times. I loved the Cone of Silence and would have used it more, but it was kind of hard to get to. The 2 guys had to be alone in the office for some reason, and there were only so many gags you could play on it. The shoe phone was used a lot more than that, I think, because it was handy to have in times of trouble. But yeah, the physical, the prepared physical gags are useful up to a point. And then, but there were also, I mean, we had the lab, which of course was lifted straight out of James Bond, where many, many actor friends came to invent certain things. I'm deeply sorry to say that nobody ever called from any government or quasi-government institution to say, you know, you're treading on dangerous ground here. Please keep these fabulous ideas to yourself. No. Nor was I ever called to say, would you like a tour of the secret, museum of weird things that have been invented to kill people with, which I would have liked. The Arab sheiks we couldn't get away with any longer. The book of political correctness has changed to a certain extent. We probably would have trouble with Harry Who. Joey Foreman at his best. The Arab one I did, which was very early on, was the taster. He had a taster who died horribly behind him. Nobody noticed while tasting his food, which was my favorite part of the show. This guy, very Peter Sellers stuff, in agony, screaming and writhing, not screaming, but writhing on the floor, while everyone else kept talking and doing stuff. And his daughter, the sheik's daughter, I think, had been kidnapped or something like that. A large, Zoftic blonde. How sheik's daughter could become that is hard to say, but nevertheless. This guy that nobody knew, an actor whose writing name was T.F. Lamoureux, came in and suggested a robot. And I thought, geez, I don't know, that's science fiction. That's sort of a different category. And then I said, but we'll play around with it, you know, do the story and see if it makes sense. Thus was born Jaime, and a terrific addition to the group of weirdos. Jaime was a great character because he was even sillier than smart when it came to the literal interpretation of events. You know, kill the light, Jaime. That kind of lame but useful joke. I was absolutely amazed that I'd completely forgotten that this person and this person and this person were in the shows. All character actors and actresses that I'd loved and had always thought about in terms of feature films. Didn't, you know? I mean, I knew we would get all the funny guys because of Don. I knew we would get Rickles and Johnny Carson and all those guys to come on. And that was always fun to do, too, to, you know, to sort of try to welcome them with a humorous moment. But I'm really surprised at all the interesting actors that were on it. It's weird to me now that I was never in one of them. I don't know why. I guess it never came up because you know, I've been in a lot of the stuff that I've done, but it never even was thought about. But part of the good thing about all that is having all your friends work at least once. Del Close, the famous Second City Chicago guy who both acted and taught for decades there and was a legend of improvisational acting in his time. He came to LA and he said, "You got a job for me?" I said, "Absolutely. Put a white coat on, go to the lab, invent some weird stuff. But you have to meet the casting lady first." The casting lady was a very fragile, very well-known, lovely, elderly lady named Pat Harris. And he walked into her office, and I said, "Pat, this is Del Close." And then I don't think I was there, because what happened was he was playing a scientist already to show her he could do it. And he had this little box he'd rigged, and he gave it a name, galvanum or something, and he put it on her desk, and he said, "Hold these two things," and she held them, and he put several thousand volts through her. And she fell off her chair. I think we had to take her to the hospital. That was Del. So there were hazards in casting that one hadn't thought about. But of course, if you have completely crazy friends, and Del qualified, that's the kind of thing that can happen.